Country where the right to abortion access was being left in the hands of state governments. When it comes to the debate over abortion care, both sides of the issue continue to express their opinions. I spoke with two of the leading voices on this controversial discussion. In the years since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, just over a dozen out of 50 states offer some sort of access to abortion care. Advocates both for and against weighed in on what the last 365 days have been like for their missions.
What that has meant is that patients have been going through chaos and confusion. So have providers, so have health center staff, and people's lives and health have really been put at risk.
They've been working, many of them, for much of the past 50 years, but we bring new people in all the time. But they are excited that their efforts actually made a difference.
This map from the Guttmacher Institute shows the impact of the High Court's decision, which left it up to states to decide how to handle abortion care. The teal and blue areas show the states which continue to offer some sort of services. Planned Parenthood remains on the front lines advocating for women who want the right to choose. This banner reading "Bands Off Our Bodies" hangs outside of one of its offices in Washington. Sam Law is the Senior Director of Advocacy Communications.
One, abortion is health care. And two, politicians have no role in a doctor's office making these types of personal health care decisions that should be left to the pregnant person, their family, and their doctors.
Carol Tobias is the president of the National Right to Life Committee, which calls itself the nation's oldest and largest pro-life organization. She says her group is working with other groups to help women care for children from unwanted pregnancies.
Is this through the raising of the child, or is this the type of support maybe a year or so after the child is born? Do you know?
It might be the first year or two, but if the help is continuously needed, I think the pro-life movement and working public and private sectors, I think the support will be there.
Okay.
We are not asking women to, bring a child into the world only to leave them in poverty.
We researched but did not find many social programs supporting women raising their child. However, some states do have charities which operate at diaper banks to help new moms. Some of the states with the strictest abortion bans are also the same states yet to adopt expanded Medicaid coverage that could potentially provide health coverage for these families. The Biden administration has repeatedly called on Congress to codify Roe v. Wade. In July of last year, just one day before the Women's March, President Biden signed an executive order admitting this was the height of what he could do if Congress didn't act. But votes on Capitol Hill last session failed to do that. Now there's a renewed effort. Camila Rueda reports.
Women are suffering because of it. Women who have been victims of rape are being denied Plan B. It's no longer part of the protocols at some hospitals. Women who suffer miscarriages are being denied DNCs or told that they have to come back to the hospital when they get ill.
Virginia Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger has proposed legislation to codify a federal right to abortion.
And that is very simple and straightforward, that a woman's right to have an abortion, those conversations belong with a woman and her medical provider. And state legislators and federal legislators have no right to dictate the choices or the health care available to a woman. And certainly codifying that, making that a clear right across the entirety of the country is incredibly important.
Spanberger wants to leave the right to choose up to women and take state lawmakers out of the conversation.
It's a very personal one. It's a deeply personal one, but it's a personal one that I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I have 3 daughters, and this is a very personal decision that I do not think that I, as a federal legislator, should be weighing in on the choices of other women.
We reached out to lawmakers opposed to codifying Roe v. Wade, but they did not respond to a request for interviews or comments. Camila Rueda, Local News Live.
A woman's right to choose is now left in the hands of states. Graham Olkins has a look at where states across the country stand on the issue.
This map shows where abortions are protected and restricted. Now, the states in orange, most of the deep south down here, are where abortions are not allowed at all stages of pregnancy. Now, this also includes Texas, where the Roe versus Wade case actually began. The only state in light purple is Georgia. That's where abortions are restricted at cardiac activity. That's typically between the 6th and 8th weeks of pregnancy. Dark purple indicates abortions are not allowed after 12 weeks, and right now the only state with that ban is Nebraska. The states that are light blue, like Iowa and Kansas, they do not allow abortions sometime between the 15th and 22nd weeks of pregnancy. And the darker blue states here, like Illinois, those are states that either do not have an abortion ban or restrict abortions sometime after the 24th week. Now, right now, of course, there are many legal challenges to a lot of these abortion bans, so this map is constantly changing. You can count on us to keep you posted as the laws update. I'm Graham Olkins for Local News Live.
Just over a dozen states across the country offer some sort of abortion care. The rest have limitations in place. Ryan Henson has the breakdown.
For the past year, from doctors' offices to courtrooms, Americans have been trying to figure out their rights when it comes to pregnancy.
Doctors and pregnant people are struggling to figure out what standards of care govern in each state respectively.
In his majority opinion on Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, Justice Samuel Alito wrote that the decision on the legality of abortion belongs at the state level, not federal. That's created a patchwork of laws across the country. American University professor Jamie Abrams specializes in reproductive rights and justice. She says it's also created constitutional questions.
While we seek to get to some sort of legal closure, women are forced to carry pregnancies to term.
Abrams is referring to one of the constitutional amendments approved more than 150 years ago after the Civil War.
Now, if we're going to force women to carry pregnancies to term, that's a form of involuntary servitude and something that was prohibited after the 13th Amendment.
Anti-abortion campaigners have also revived another 19th century law. In April, a Texas judge used the Comstock Act from 1873 to prohibit sending FDA-approved abortion pills through the mail. These legal challenges could take years to resolve. Some women are filing civil suits to create faster change. While legal battles continue to play out in courts, Abrams points out the human cost continues to increase.
Maternal mortality rate is 3 times for Black women, is 3 times what it is for white women in this state. And so forcing someone to carry a pregnancy to term can have real life and death circumstances.
Ryan Henson, Local News Live.
Democrats campaigned heavily on abortion access during the midterms. Despite their efforts, they weren't able to hold on to the House. With the presidential election coming up, how big of an issue will the overturning of Roe versus Wade be? I asked White House correspondent and lawyer John Decker as we anticipate where this debate goes next.
As we reflect back on the past year, of course, we have to look forward. Do you anticipate that we'll see even more restrictions moving forward?
I think that as it relates to those states that had those trigger laws, they've already imposed those restrictions. Indiana, for instance, actually prohibits abortions altogether in the state. That's a pretty restrictive abortion. But I think that politicians also recognize, particularly Republicans, that this is not a good issue for them. And because of that, I think that they have moved as far as they want to go on the issue of abortion because those same Republicans believe this impacted them in a negative way this past midterm election. That's one of the reasons that many Republicans believe they were not able to flip the Senate and put it into the control of Republicans for the next 2 years.
One of the issues that's coming up as we look back over this past year is the issues over maternal care for these women who are having to care for these unwanted pregnancies. Do you think we could potentially see something from that from Republicans? Because that's been a very somewhat heavily debated topic to the point of that, yes, we're now having these women have these babies, but the care isn't there for them.
It really depends on the state, Nicole. You know, I think that there are some states in which the votes are there and there is a push by the constituents in those states to have that type of issue legislated, and there are other states in which it's not. What we've really seen, though, is the red states in this country have imposed more restrictions since the Dobbs decision last June, and the blue states have put into place legislation which guarantees the rights which did exist under Roe versus Wade. So California, Oregon, Vermont, New York State, those are examples of that.
Other implications here. We know in that initial brief, it circulated about the potential we could look into interracial marriage, gay rights. Do you see anything happening at the Supreme Court level moving forward?
It's important to keep in mind that that viewpoint was really only expressed by one justice, and that's Clarence Thomas. He's had that point of view for a number of years, so it's not necessarily something new, and it wasn't just in the draft that we saw that Alito wrote, it was also in the final Supreme Court opinion, majority opinion. That position that's held by Clarence Thomas is not a position that's held by any other conservative justice. That being said, you could understand why politically Democrats will play this up as we get closer to the presidential election year, with the idea that if this court, the Supreme Court, moves further to the right, they could adopt the position that was expressed by Clarence Thomas on a variety of important issues, including the issue of same-sex marriage, the issue of the constitutionality of just using contraception, and the issue of interracial marriage. All of those rights are now enshrined by Supreme Court decisions, but you can understand politically why Democrats would play up that concurring opinion by Justice Clarence Thomas.
Democrats, speaking of playing up, we know that President Biden signed that executive order last year. That was right before the Women's March in July. And essentially he was like, you know, this is the realm of what I can do without Congress acting. For the third time, it is rumored that Congress is supposed to potentially take up the Women's Health Protection Act, which would codify Roe versus Wade. We didn't see a lot of movement with Democrats being in control of both chambers last year, or last session rather. Do you think that there's any potential movement this session if it's brought back up?
I don't, and the numbers are simply not there for that. And President Biden recognizes that. Republicans control the House, and so it's unlikely to move out of the House. For that reason, most, if not all, Republicans view themselves, they would describe themselves as pro-life. And in the Senate, in order to move that type of legislation forward, you need 60 votes. So although Democrats have a majority in the U.S. Senate, and there are some Republicans who would describe themselves as pro-choice, Susan Collins of Maine is an example, they are not near that 60-vote threshold. So the likelihood of that type of legislation enshrining the rights contained in Roe versus Wade into federal law seems very unlikely with the numbers that are present right now.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
Thanks, Nicole.
Prior to the official decision coming down in late June, Politico published the case's leaked draft opinion in early May. The opinion was written by conservative Justice Samuel Alito. In it, he stated Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. So let's take a look back to the Supreme Court's initial decision. As Ryan Pierce reports, it was in 1973 when the High Court first legalized abortion, which granted women the right to choose.
This all began in 1970 when Jane Roe sued the district attorney of Dallas County, Texas. Jane Roe was a legal pseudonym for Norma McCorvey, who wanted an abortion. She couldn't get one because at the time abortions were only legal in Texas when they were necessary to save the life of the mother. Roe's lawyers argued that the state's abortion laws were unconstitutional. The U.S. District Court of Northern Texas ruled in her favor. The state appealed the decision, and the case headed to the nation's highest court. In January 1973, the Supreme Court ruled that the 14th Amendment provides a fundamental right to privacy. The justices wrote in their opinion that this protects a woman's right to an abortion. The opinion also included a pregnancy trimester timetable. This governed all abortion regulations in the United States. The court also classified the right to abortion as fundamental. This required courts to evaluate abortion laws that are challenged under the strictest level of justice review in the country. The Supreme Court reaffirmed their decision in 1992 when they issued their ruling for Planned Parenthood versus Casey. This ruling overruled the trimester framework laid out in Roe versus Wade. It also eliminated the strict scrutiny standard, but brought in the undue burden test. Ryan Pierce, Local News Live.
Now, what about the numbers? Prior to the overturning of Roe versus Wade, the exact number of abortions being performed was hard to come by. That's according to the Pew Research Center. But the latest numbers reported in 2020 found there were more than 620,000 abortions performed nationally. That's a 1.5% increase from the prior year. In the wake of the overturning of Roe versus Wade, we're looking at how the ruling impacted the number of abortions performed. And as Deborah Alfarone reports, some providers are offering now what's being called a virtual abortion.
In the 6 months after the Supreme Court overturned the landmark case, there were 32,000 fewer abortions. That's according to the Society of Family Planning's We Count report. The states with the biggest increase in the procedure in that time period include Florida, Illinois, North Carolina, Colorado, and Michigan. The states with the biggest decrease include Texas, where Roe versus Wade originated, Georgia, Tennessee, Ohio, Arizona, and Louisiana. The report found about 5,000 of the abortions performed following the overturn of Roe versus Wade were performed virtually. This does not include abortions provided in virtual clinics where they are allowed by law. What exactly is a virtual abortion and how does it work? In most cases, the provider prescribes 2 pills, including mifepristone, which ends the pregnancy. Deborah Alfarone, Local News Live.
Hey Jane, an organization that provides virtual abortions, reports a 163% increase since the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Ryan Pierce spoke with the organization's head of medical about how this all works.
Basically, patients fill out a kind of a online questionnaire. It's pretty in-depth, where we go over their medical history, help date the pregnancy. Then that intake is reviewed by a nurse and a nurse practitioner or a medical doctor, who then can reach out to the patient with any additional questions or any concerns. Once everything looks like it's safe and appropriate to go, we then will send a prescription to Honeybee, who will mail it to the patient's door.
Now, patients need to travel to states where the medical abortion is legal, right, in order to receive that medication from Hey Jane in your partnership with Honeybee.
Correct. So they would have to be in a state where we're able to provide care.
So this probably adds to the significance of your recent decision to begin operating in Virginia. What is the significance of that move?
Well, so many of the locations that we are active in, it's based on the existing laws that state have. But in addition to that, we also look for states which are called access states, states where we know patients are traveling to access abortion. That's probably why we've seen post-Dobbs the biggest increase in patients to Illinois, Colorado, and New Mexico. Those are states where we've seen an influx in patients, and we know that there's a good chance that that's due to patients traveling out of state to access abortion.
Now, sometimes these laws in states can be confusing. They're written purposely in many ways for that very reason. Do you have to be in a state where abortion is allowed to take the medication?
Yes. That is part of the thing. So you have to take treatment in an access state. You have to have your consultation in an access state. Or one where we're located. And that's in part due to abortion, obviously, but also just in part due to telehealth. So care happens where the patient is. And so you need to be in the state that you are in for us to provide care and to take the treatment. Also that, we've seen that can put a pretty high risk for patients in some of these states like Texas, where traveling and then returning, we wouldn't want to put anybody at risk.
Now, the access to telehealth has played a big role in Hey Jane in making it easier to receive this kind of treatment, and just the improvements in telehealth have been a big part of this process.
Yeah, it's amazing. We have patients who we know live in very rural areas where it might take them 3 or more hours to get to an in-person clinic. And they're able to have a consultation with us, and within 24 business hours are able to get treatment from us.
That's an important clarification. It's not just patients who are in states where abortion has been made illegal. It's patients in states where abortion is legal, but maybe they're in an area where it's tough to access it. You guys fill that gap.
Oh, totally. Like California, people think of California as a huge access state, and it is. It's wonderful. But there are still some very rural areas and parts of California where patients do not necessarily have easy access to an in-clinic abortion. Additionally, because California is an access state, many of these in-person clinics have gotten an influx of patients as well. And so there can be longer wait times, things like that, even in these access states that we can kind of help mitigate.
Mifepristone is now at the center of a legal battle. A recent ruling by the Supreme Court allows it to still be available nationwide, while a legal challenge works its way through the court system. KFDA's Sydney Batzleff explains the case's connection to Amarillo, Texas.
When anti-abortion groups decided they wanted to challenge the Food and Drug Administration's approval of an abortion-inducing drug, mifepristone, they decided to file it right here in Amarillo, Texas. The first hearing of that case happening at the federal courthouse where lawyers argue before Judge Matthew Kaczmarek. Anti-abortion advocates and doctors arguing the drug causes harm to women. They asked Judge Kaczmarek for a temporary injunction to stop sales of the drug nationwide, including in states allowing abortions. A month later, Judge Kaczmarek issued his ruling suspending the FDA's approval of the pill. That ruling was then blocked by the Supreme Court, allowing mifepristone to stay, but with some restrictions. Then last month, it was back in the lower court. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals is now considering the future of the pill used for more than half of U.S. abortions. The court did not say how quickly it will issue a ruling. Once that happens, the case will need to go back to the Supreme Court before the ruling goes into effect. As of now, access to mifepristone is unaffected as the case moves on. For Local News Live, I'm Sydney Batzloff with KFDA in Amarillo, Texas.
Some lawmakers in Washington are also renewing the effort to access all forms of FDA-approved birth control into federal law. Washington correspondent Jamie Bittner has the story.
Standing shoulder to shoulder with fellow Democrats, Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey announced the reintroduction of the Right to Contraception Act.
People are showing up to pharmacies expecting to get their prescription filled and instead are turned away.
The bill would enshrine the right to access birth control into federal law. It would also protect any drug, device, or product that is used to prevent a pregnancy from restrictions.
The partisan Supreme Court majority stripped away the right to abortion and put a target on the back of the right to contraception.
A 1965 ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court called Griswold versus Connecticut already protects the use of contraception. Yet Markey says the current conservative-leaning Supreme Court signaled they're willing to overturn that ruling too. In the 2022 Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization opinion, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote, "We should reconsider all of this court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold."
Justice Clarence Thomas gave us a window into just how far he would go to dismantle Americans' freedoms.
The Guttmacher Institute says 9 states have already allowed healthcare providers to refuse to provide contraception services to patients. Meanwhile, some anti-abortion activists have also tried to block contraception and abortion medication by reviving the 1872 Comstock Law. That law prohibited the mailing of contraception until the 1970s. In Washington, Jamie Bittner, Local News Live.
Thank you for joining me for this special edition of Local News Live. I'm Nicole Newman.
You're watching Local News Live, the one place you need for live coverage of national news from trusted local journalists who know the story best. Breaking news on the scene, showing you the story as it's happening, connecting you to the communities at the heart of the country's biggest stories. Local News Live. Live reports, local perspective.
You are watching Local News Live, and I'm Deborah Alfaro.
I'm Nicole Newman, the CEO of Norfolk Southern.
Always streaming, always free.
If you need to do something to feel okay to drive, you're not okay to drive. Don't drive buzzed.
You're watching Local News Live, the one place you need for live coverage of national news. From trusted local journalists who know the story best. Breaking news on the scene, showing you the story as it's happening, connecting you to the communities at the heart of the country's biggest stories. Local News Live. Live reports, local perspective.
You are watching Local News Live, and I'm Deborah Alfaro.
I'm Nicole Newman, the CEO of Norfolk Southern.
Always streaming, always free.
You're there for them. We're here for you. Find free care guides at aarp.org/caregiving.
Look at it. It's so sad.
Attacks against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are on the rise.
My simple solution to the problem was remove people from the scene and help them feel safer. In terms of the hate crimes, I think there is so much more work to be done. We really need to come together and tackle this issue as a community.
Welcome back to Local News Live. June is Cataract Awareness Month, and according to a new study, cataract surgery can help turn back the clock for patients' vision, with the world's population of people over 60 set to double over the next 25 years. It's more important now than ever for people to understand the disease and take steps to prevent it. So joining us now is Dr. Netta Shami, a cataract LASIK and corneal surgeon, and Kelly Kaminsky, a cataract surgery patient who's benefited from these procedures. Thank you both for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having us.
Oh, our pleasure. Doctor, what are some misconceptions about
Dad?
Just 1 minute, okay?
Hey, Bobo, do trees tell each other stories?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know that.
Hey, why don't we go find out? Listen.
Do clouds take naps?
I couldn't tell you.
Can birds draw pictures?
I don't have an answer for that.
Dad, do stars visit their friends?
Look!
Gracias. Thank you.
What's wrong, mijo?
Donating to a pet's medical care can keep families together. Pets and people belong together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
You're watching Local News Live, the one place you need for live coverage of national news. From trusted local journalists who know the story best. Breaking news on the scene, showing you the story as it's happening, connecting you to the communities at the heart of the country's biggest stories. Local News Live. Live reports, local perspective.
You are watching Local News Live, and I'm Deborah Alfaro.
I'm Nicole Newman, the CEO of Norfolk Southern.
Always streaming, always free.
When it comes to making plans, you are the best. The same way you plan each detail for those moments, start planning to protect you and your loved ones from a natural disaster. Protecting your family is the best plan you can make.
After 15 years of smoking, Eva Marie quit. There's a new lung cancer screening that could save her life. You stopped smoking. Now start screening. Learn more at savedbythescan.org.
Last week, Brandon met a girl on a dating app. One day after work, he finally found the courage to ask her out. No answer. He started to panic. Was he being too pushy? Maybe it was too...
Hey, sorry I didn't respond. I was driving. I would love to go on a date. How does tonight sound?
Brandon tried to play it cool, but inside he knew. A girl so smart, so responsible. She must be a keeper.
I know kids worry about a lot of things. Getting enough food to eat shouldn't be one of them. Through a nationwide network of food banks, Feeding America serves virtually every community in the United States. See how you can help your community. Visit feedingamerica.org.
Watching Local News Live, I'm Nicole Newman. Deborah is on assignment. Interstate 95 in Philadelphia is back open. This is after 2 weeks when a section of the road collapsed. This is the moment here when the roadway reopened at noon today. Now, since the collapse, crews have been working around the clock to create a workaround. For now, drivers will use a temporary 6-lane road until construction of a permanent bridge is complete. Officials originally said it may take months for the road to open.
This was a moment of civic pride for Philly and Pennsylvania. We all came together and we proved that we could do big things again in Pennsylvania. We all came together and we showed that when times get hard, Pennsylvanians show up for one another.
An elevated section of I-95 collapsed on June 11. It was after a tractor trailer hauling gasoline flipped on an off-ramp and caught fire. The driver was killed. Today is day 2 of the investigative hearings on the East Palestine train derailment. Investigators are looking into the failures that caused it and how to make sure it doesn't happen again. WOIO's Jeff Slauson was there this morning. Hi, Jeff. What can you tell us?
Yeah, this is a very, very long process, just getting to the beginning of this, and this is a moment that folks have been waiting months for. February 3rd, you may remember, is when that train derailment initially happened, taking thousands of people out of their homes. 40, 50,000 animals died as a result of the toxic waste that was spilled, and ultimately the decision was made to burn that off. And today, the NTSB is finally giving us the answers that many people have really been waiting for. I want to show you what it looks like from the day when this crash happened again on February 3rd. Now, what we are learning slowly from the investigation that the NTSB took place is that a lot of this centers around the braking system, essentially, or HBD, hot bearing detectors. What these do, when a train goes through its normal route, right, when it's just kind of driving normally, it'll pass by detectors every so often. Those detectors are used to determine if the bearings or wheels, essentially, that you're looking at are doing well. If they're not heated too much, if they're not under too much stress. If they are heated too much, then the idea here is that it would inform the train's conductor and then stop the train before anything catastrophic takes place. That did not happen here. We are learning for the first time officially that what happened is these bearings passed through multiple levels. Nothing happened, nothing changed. And then they passed through one, and that is when the alarm finally went off. And by the time that the conductors reacted in a way that the NTSB says needed to happen, it was far too late. And that is when ultimately the train did derail. The NTSB is saying that this is something they are still looking into, but obviously the answers need to be coming a little bit quicker for a lot of the folks that live there.
Unfortunately, the train derailed before it was able to come to a complete stop. While safety mechanisms were not able to prevent this accident in this instance, we are committed to learning from it, and we have worked every day since the derailment with industry partners, regulators, and the NTSB to continue to improve railroad safety.
So the session stopped for a quick lunch break. They did the same thing yesterday. In the early morning, we were learning about those wheel bearings and the possible defects that took place. Now in this later few hours, which we of course will be digital streaming for all of our digital platforms here, we're learning about the rail tank car safety itself. So what specifically in the rail tank car could have resulted in the spillage of those toxic chemicals, and potentially how they can learn from that and make improvements. Here's the thing, though. I mean, for many of these people, they don't care about the improvements that are going to be happening in the future. They want to know why this happened and potentially why they are now having to deal with the consequences of some companies, potentially Norfolk Southern, not necessarily following the safety procedures to a T.
OIO's Jeff Slauson, thank you so much for this update.
Well, experts are trying to piece together how the Titan submersible imploded. Debris from the sub was found yesterday after days of searching. Now the U.S. Navy reports it detected the sound of what they identified as an implosion on Sunday. It was in the area where the Titan lost contact with its support ship. 5 people were on board. Among them was Stockton Rush, the CEO of OceanGate. That's the company that operated the submersible. Since the Titan's disappearance, details have come out about concerns over the submersible's experimental design and development process. OceanGate's co-founder is asking people not to rush to judgment. Well, Washington Post reporter Andrea Salcedo has been covering the story all week. She joins us now. Now, Andrea, we just talked about concerns with the sub's design. Can you talk more about what they are?
Sure. So what we know from what Mr. Roche, the pilot of the submersible, had told other outlets and had touted on the website was that his submersible was designed with some carbon. And usually that's not how you want to go with this type of vessel that's diving deep into the ocean. You want to make sure that it is made of titanium. That's what our experts told my colleagues who just published a piece on the concerns that experts had raised. And another of the concerns that was raised and that Mr. Rush and OceanGate put on their website in 2019 was the fact that although it's not required to classify these vessels who are going deep into the waters, he was choosing not to. Although like the majority of these vessels do, you do have to pay a fee, and then they check that everything is working correctly before they said, okay, here you go, you can go out and go into the sea. He said that that was kind of obstructing innovation, and that a lot of the issues that occur with submersibles are usually happening because of a human error, not because of a mechanical failure. So he openly disclosed that his submersibles were not going to be undergoing any type of classification. And that's kind of like as far as one can go when it comes to regulations for this type of vessels that go very deep into the sea. And I can go into that of why this is kind of like a gray land, expert told us.
Well, let's get into that because a lot of people are wondering now in the wake of all this how the submersible was regulated and what that oversight looks like. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so my colleague, Ben Brash, he actually was the one who reported on this. And pretty much there's not really that much you can do once these vessels go out in the sea because it's international sea. Like the sea doesn't belong to anyone. And these vessels are treated as cargo. Once you put something in there, no one's going to be enforcing it. And how can you enforce something so deep into the water? I think my colleague Ben put it in a really good way in the Post Reports episode that was published yesterday. He said it's kind of like you have no cops down there to oversee this. So this lack of regulation and this gray area has kind of led the submersible companies to do as they wish or as they think is best. So that's why there wasn't much that they could be doing to follow protocol because the chemical isn't in there. Even that classification that I spoke about earlier, that's optional and you have to pay for it. And experts said, well, you would want your vessel and your submersible to undergo this classification just to make sure that everything is working as it should be, even if it's not mandated. But his company chose not to, and we will figure out if international bodies and the United States and Canada, for example, enforce and put in place new regulations after this incident and after the investigation reveals what went wrong.
Okay, well, time will tell. Washington Post reporter Andrea Salcedo, thank you so much, one, for your work on this and also for taking the time to speak with me today.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Turning to Memphis now, where all 5 officers charged in the death of Tyree Nichols were back in court. 4 have filed a motion in federal court asking their civil case be paused until their criminal case is resolved. 2 officers are also asking for separate trials. It comes as attorneys are asking for some evidence not to be released. One attorney says he is especially concerned about law enforcement reports from the night of the shooting.
So that, to me, is the most dangerous part, when you have investigative materials by law enforcement officers, by people in positions of authority saying things that we disagree with. And to put that out into the public where a potential jury could hear it, we don't think that's the right thing to do.
Today, for the first time, Nichols' siblings were in court. The hearing lasted for about 10 minutes. In Ohio, 3 brothers ages 3 to 7 will be celebrated at an event this weekend. It's after police say their father killed them last week. On Sunday, community members will have an opportunity to share their memories of Chase, Hunter, and Clayton Dorman. It's before they're laid to rest on Monday. It comes as their father, 32-year-old Chad Dorman, is charged with aggravated murder, kidnapping, and assault. According to court documents, Chad shot his sons with a rifle. While records don't reveal a motive, a detective is quoted in a criminal complaint saying, quote, Chad confessed to planning and carrying out the deaths for several months. In Missouri, community members are frustrated after a 9-year-old boy became the 41st child injured or killed due to gun violence. This is since the beginning of the year. As KMOV's John Kipper reports, a concerned citizen is begging lawmakers to take action